Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind a beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, we need to point out we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, so we don't know yet whether it's the Netherlands or England going through to lose to Spain in the final of the Euros, but it's getting closer. Have you got Euro final fever, Kieran?
I have. I've got a ticket for the final, so I've booked my flights there and back, heading across Friday morning, in hope and expectation. I think, I'm feeling very positive. I thought we'd be okay in the quarterfinals, and it was a bit of a squeaky bum time, but we got through there. And I think, along with everybody else, the enthusiasm is growing match by match.
Yeah, no, I'll be honest with you, Kieran. At half time in that Switzerland game, I thought I was being gaslit by every other football fan in the country. Even my son texted to say we're playing really well. I was like, well, I must be on a different channel, because I thought we were incredibly lucky. But I think we're going to fluke our way through and be the worst team ever to win a major tournament, Kieran. So,
no, Greece 2004.
Oh, fair. Oh, God, fair point. I'd forgotten that. The memory is kind that way, isn't it? You'll be happy, Kieran. You're such a chipper person. You'll be happy even if it is the Netherlands playing Spain in the final, won't you?
Oh, yeah. I love them. I love the Netherlands as a country. It's my favourite, along with Germany in Europe.
Yeah. And how did you get a ticket, Kieran? Like a little UEFA sweetener there? Little Sephirin on the phone trying to keep you quiet in future?
Billy the Tout. Say no more.
Billy the Tout needs to change his nickname, doesn't he? People are going to see through that.
Well, it's when it's on his passport, and he's going through customs. So, what do you do, William?
Well, of course, in France, he's Billy Le Tout, which is a completely different name. Isn't it? It's Newsday, Kieran. We've got a lot of stories, Kieran, some of which have been moving down the agenda, which I thought would have been big news stories, but there are other big news stories to replace them. The first two stories are linked in a way, and the first concerns UEFA and Manchester United and Manchester City.
Yes, there was concern that both the Manchester clubs are connected to other clubs in Europe. So you've got Manchester United via Jim Ratcliffe, who now seems to be running Manchester United on a day-to-day basis, also is in control of Nice. We've got Manchester City and their involvement with Girona. And the issue is that those clubs could potentially face each other in the Champions League or the Europa League. And in terms of integrity of the sport, it would be potentially a match where there could be mutually beneficial results. Now, let's be honest, that happens all the time in football, but we do believe, I think, traditionally that every team goes on to a pitch with the aim of winning. And in order to try to preserve that, what we've seen is UEFA have not taken as draconian a position as they did with both Aston Villa and Brighton last year, where they made the owners effectively sell investments in other clubs. But what they've done instead is that they've said, as far as one of the clubs is concerned, and I would imagine it's going to be, certainly going to be Nice and Girona, that the ownership of City Football Group and Jim Ratcliffe has to be transferred to what we refer to as a blind trust. Now, a blind trust is where the trustees are chosen by UEFA's Club Financial Control Board, which so therefore it's not a case of offshore Jim choosing half a dozen of his mates to run Nice nominally. The trustees will be able to dictate sort of the commercial, the strategic decisions being made in terms of recruitment and so on. I do have some sympathy here with Manchester United. Jim Ratcliffe said that they tried to sign a player from Nice and they've been unable to do so because of the links between the two clubs, because both clubs are in the same competition. Where that potential transfer will move, if we do have this transfer of ownership or control, waits to be seen.
I'm aware that I'm going to be mixing metaphors in response to this, Kieran, but you say UEFA are being more sensible. I say UEFA are caving in. And it seems to me that UEFA are admitting here that they can't put the multi-club model back into the bottle, essentially, that it's only going to get worse for them as years go by, as more and more clubs are taken into multi-club ownership. So they're going to have to eventually make some kind of rapprochement with their own rules, aren't they? And it seems that that's what they're doing already, isn't it?
Yes, I think they're putting this one into some form of waiting room before a final decision is made with regards to how we are going to address the issue of multi-club ownership. And this is only going to get a bigger and bigger problem if, and I'm using that word if instead of when, we've got the 32 club FIFA World Club Championship arriving in 12 months' time, because City Football Group also has significant investments, not just in Europe, but in other federations as far as FIFA is concerned. UEFA have hinted that they're not keen on the multi-club model, but from a legal point of view, where do they stand? What happens, for example, if a club decides that they see that as a restriction of trade, or rather the club owners sees it as a restriction of trade, and therefore we end up in court yet again, which is A, expensive, B, long-winded, and C, potentially transformative, because if the ruling of a court was that multi-club owner models are fine and you don't have to have any form of independent ownership and governance between clubs, I think in terms of the reputation of the game, it would be negative. At the same time, would it impact upon fans attending? No. Would it impact upon commercial and TV money? No. But it would leave a nasty taste in the mouth.
I believe, to clarify, Kieran, you know what happens sometimes when I do my own research. It can go pear-shaped. But I believe UEFA consider anyone having a stake of 10% or more in another club, that's considered a significant interest, isn't it?
That's right. And
clearly Ratcliffe has got much more than 10% in Manchester United.
Yeah, he's not only got a 27% stake in Manchester United, he has this written agreement with the majority owners, the Glazer families, that he has responsibility for footballing matters. And the definition of footballing matters appears to have extended, given that it was very much Ineos who have been the driving force behind the proposed sackings of staff or redundancies of staff at Manchester United. Although I'm still firmly of the view that the Glazers are absolutely delighted about this. But if the smell test, in terms of if the Glazers had announced 250 redundancies, Manchester United fans would be up in arms, because I think probably the majority of Manchester United fans, preferred the Ratcliffe bid to that of Sheikh Jassim, because there's certainly local opposition in Manchester, I can assure you, to Middle Eastern ownership of Manchester United. They feel they have to go all in behind Ineos and Ratcliffe, regardless of the potential human cost of some of these decisions which are being made.
You would probably argue, Kieran, that Nice and Girona, owned by United and City respectively, are moderate-sized clubs. But Liverpool are probably going to add to UEFA's problems, because they're looking to buy a much bigger club, aren't they?
Yes. FSG, Liverpool's owners, it looks as if they are making progress with an acquisition of Bordeaux. Bordeaux have significant financial problems, to such an extent that they potentially could be relegated on the back of that, because they've not been able to provide the French football authorities with sufficient evidence that they've got money themselves to run the club for the next 12 months. FSG, in my opinion, are spectacularly good at what they do. They take a very forensic approach. It'll take a very analytical approach to what you can get. As we've discussed at length before, there are significant benefits in having a multi-club ownership model. And I think that when Liverpool recruited or re-recruited Michael Edwards to come back with a new role, it was very much on the back of, you're not just going to be involved in Liverpool, but we want you in charge of a multi-club vehicle. And Michael Edwards is a man with a very high, held in very high regard, with a good reputation. So the benefits from Liverpool's point of view is that, again, you can send players out on loan. You'll have the same culture, the same training methods, the same diet, the same sports science. You would try to sort of make Bordeaux sort of a mini-me in terms of the way that the club is run. And that means that players can be brought from other countries to Bordeaux as a sort of a holding area and then brought to the mothership if they continue to proceed. In terms of the issues following Brexit, which we've discussed at length before, you cannot recruit 16 and 17-year-old players from Europe to the Premier League as a result of Brexit changes. And as anybody saw in the semi-final when Spain beat France, there's some quite tasty 16-year-olds already in European football. And you're going to be denied that. So by having a European club, what you could do, spot somebody good, bring them to Bordeaux, hold them there till they're 18, and then potentially they can go to Liverpool. So there's all of these ramifications, economies of scale in terms of both revenues and costs and so on. And we wait to see. Liverpool's not a club which I'd ever be worried about in terms of PSR because it's so well run. But we have seen in other close relationships between clubs, there could be potential PSR benefits as well.
When I was a 16-year-old goalkeeper, Kieran, I could barely clear the box with a goal kick. And there's that little bugger doing that. It's just, what an astonishing goal. The reason I say this is adding to UEFA's problems, Kieran, is that history would tell us that Liverpool are much more likely to face Bordeaux in a European competition than Man United or Man City are likely to face Nice and Girona, aren't they?
Well, I mean, Girona have done spectacularly well this season. Now, how much of that is due to the City influence or the City Football Group influence in those issues that we've discussed is open to question. But yes, I mean, Manchester United fans, so I think Manchester United as a club would feel that their natural position as far as European football is concerned would be the Champions League. And I know it's been a bit spotty in terms of actual achievement of that in recent years. But Bordeaux, I think that you can buy them for relatively cheap because of the challenges that they have. The French football is in a bit of a mess in terms of TV deals and so on. And therefore, on the back of that, I think Liverpool are picking up a club at a very advantageous price.
You may hear some extraneous noise in the background, Kieran. It's because we have a bevy of Ali's stage managers turning up for a pre-edited meeting, and quite clearly, using my Sherlock Holmes deductive power, she's told them not to ring the doorbell because that will disturb the pod. So instead they're banging on it, not the doorbell, they're just knocking on the door quite loudly, much louder than you'd expect a bevy of stage managers to do, Kieran, considering part of their job is to be quiet during performances. Billy the Tout, Kieran, won't be happy with this. I don't think Billy the Tout will be happy that his name's come up on this pod at all, to be honest, Kieran. But if he is listening, he's going to be even more cross at this next story because there are crackdowns, Kieran, and there are crackdowns.
That's right. So this has come from the London Standard paper. Arsenal have banned 20,000 members. Yeah. Football clubs make a fortune, or rather, certain football clubs make a fortune from these membership schemes. And the reason why they are such a success is, for want of a better phrase, what the bigger clubs tend to do is that they have excess demand on a week-by-week basis, and they're able to effectively have, perhaps 2 or 3 times a year, they put tickets up for sale. And in order to buy a ticket as a one-off, you have to be a member. But Arsenal have banned 20,000 members from their system for issues in relation to touting. So what was happening is that people were setting up, for want of a better phrase, farms. They would get they'd either use bots or they would get an army of people to pay whatever it is, say the £30 for a ticket. And then as soon as tickets were released, they would flood the ticket office. Remember, the tickets office is now online, with a view to hoovering up as many of these tickets as possible and then selling them on at a profit. So clearly Arsenal have done some homework. And as well as 20,000 members, 54 season ticket holders, and I think that's quite a low number, have, by all accounts, lost their membership or lost their rights as season ticket holders, because what they've been doing is selling on tickets on a match-by-match basis. So is that good or is that bad? Well, it's good in the sense that I think intuitively we don't particularly like the idea of touts and touting, even though many of us will have used that ourselves. However, clubs often act in their own self-interest as well. Because what the football club wants you to do is that if you buy a ticket for a match, or if you're a season ticket holder and the match is sold out, they want you to sell the ticket back to them. So if you're a season ticket holder at Arsenal, you get 1/19 of your season ticket price back. So you buy the ticket and then they will sell the ticket on. And I know certainly at one club, according to our sources, what they do is if those are pairs of tickets, they will sell those back as a quasi-hospitality package. They will say, well, the tickets, it was normally, it was costing the season ticket holder, let's say 40 quid, got a pair of tickets. We will offer them as a hospitality package. You've got a pair of tickets to go to the Emirates or Old Trafford or wherever the ground's going to be. And what we'll do is we'll charge you 250 or 300 quid for these pair of tickets, but you get a chance to have a meal, you get a chance to have a photo with a legend, you have a couple of anecdotes, picture perhaps next to the Premier League or the FA Cup or whatever it's going to be, and the clubs are making a lot more money. So the clubs are effectively touting themselves, and therefore, whilst the likes of Billy will be disappointed, they are being replaced by the clubs acting as their very own touts. The touts, however, are fighting back. The technology is very much a case of whack-a-mole with regards to how touts can get around this system, and they do, I can assure you.
To put that 20,000 members into context or perspective, if you prefer, we've got an interview tomorrow, very good interview tomorrow, with Richard Allen, who's chair of the Shrimps Trust up there in Morecambe. And they have 800 members, which is probably a third, he would say, of Morecambe's fan base. And yet Arsenal are able to ban 20,000 members, and it probably won't make a blip on the members they still have. And also, I believe those 54 season ticket holders that have been banned, I think at least 40 of them have been banned for not turning up to games, because Arsenal don't want empty seats turning up, because apparently they've got very stringent rules. If you don't attend at least 2/3 of the games that you paid for, which seems a bit odd, then you forfeit your season ticket.
Yes, we've seen a variety of responses from clubs to issues like this. Life gets in the way. And remember, we are not operating in a 3 p.m. Saturday environment anymore. So I do think it's a bit cheeky of clubs to say, what we expect you to do every weekend is to set aside any time of our choosing between effectively 7:45 p.m. on a Friday to 7:45 p.m. on a Monday to be able to get to matches. So ignoring the fact that, should we therefore for every home weekend say we're not going to organise any chances to see friends, book tickets to see concerts, go to the theatre, just in case the Premier League and the broadcasters decide to change the timetable. To be fair to the EFL, it is saying at the start of August, we're going to give you effectively until the rest of the year. We're going to give you a major heads up. So I think there's less of an issue, there's less of a problem in the EFL. At least you do have that advance notice. But because of the nature of the broadcasting agreement between the Premier League and the major broadcasters, they want a much shorter window, because there could be something exciting happening at an individual club, change of manager, and you want to make sure you want to get that manager's club appearing on TV as early as possible. As a fan that goes to away matches, it's a complete pain in the backside, because you can't get cheap rail tickets because they tend to be sold out by the time you've got clarification. So there's lots of implications here. Everything is geared towards the benefit of the club. In defence of the clubs, for a club like Arsenal, you should have a ticket exchange. So if Arsenal were saying
They do, yeah.
we are going to ban those fans who are not taking advantage of the ticket exchange, I do have a little bit of sympathy for them. And it does seem crazy to have matches where there are tickets going empty when you know there's certainly enough demand to put bums on seats.
So if Billy the Tout has got the hump with the Arsenal news, if Billy the Tout happens to be a Forest fan, Kieran, this might cheer him up.
Yes. This is an intriguing one because Nottingham Council put out a press release, in effect, to say that they are very close to securing an agreement with Nottingham Forest. Presently, there's a leasehold in which the club could potentially buy the freehold from the local council. And the first reaction to that from Forest fans, because Forest fans want to stay at the City Ground, and I don't blame them. It's a fantastic stadium to visit. Yeah. It's a fantastic city to visit as an away fan. So I absolutely understand the perspective of Forest fans, and I think the alternative that the club's been talking about is an out-of-town stadium. As somebody who supports a club that's got an out-of-town stadium, that has negatives as well as positives, especially if you've got restricted parking facilities. But what we then saw was a fairly quick response to this coming from Nottingham Forest itself, which says, we're not denying that we're in negotiations, but we will only sign the freehold if the people who can say yay or indeed nay to ground expansion agree to an extension of the stadium. I.e., they've said to the council, yes, we'll buy the freehold, but at the same time, you've got to approve an increase in the stadium size and all of the other changes that we want. Now, whether that would include such things as licenses to have concerts in the summer, for example, whether that's to change some of the local infrastructure in terms of road access and so on, we don't know what those are. So the council have been, I think, quite bullish, and Forest have sort of rode back on this to say, yes, we'll certainly buy the freehold, but it comes with conditions, and we feel we're in a strong negotiating position with regards to those conditions.
This next story, Kieran, is a rare example of a story in which I think I can do the maths. And it involves Sport Republic Limited, who own the majority of Southampton, reporting a £56 million loss in 2022-23. But there could be a reason for that, Kieran, which even I can work out.
Yes, this was a weird one. Sport Republic own, I think it's 88% of Southampton Football Club. And when they bought the club, they paid what they considered to be a fair price. Now, that was before Southampton were relegated at the end of 2023. And it has to be acknowledged, of course, that Southampton have bounced straight back to the Premier League. But that £56 million loss is very connected to a £56 million write-down, i.e. the owners have said, on reflection, we probably overpaid for Southampton. We bought the club with a belief that Southampton would be in the Premier League, not on a permanent basis, but on on something pretty close to that. And we now acknowledge that perhaps we were being a bit over-optimistic. And when you value a business, one of the things that you do is that you look to the future and you look at your expected cash flows generated from whatever that business does. And in the case of most businesses, if I'm Apple and I'm selling iPhones, you can sell iPhones forever and a day, provided you come up with a new design all the time. If I was looking at Manchester United or Liverpool or Manchester City, looking at the big clubs, and some of the London clubs, the Arsenal, Chelsea, Spurs, and so on, I would say, if I'm looking at future cash flows, I would have those guaranteed revenues in terms of broadcasting. If I'm doing a valuation of our clubs, if I'm doing a valuation of Brighton and Palace, say, or if I look at the next 10 years, how many of those next 10 years am I very, very confident that the clubs will be in the Premier League? I'd have to say, in the case of both clubs, and this isn't a dig at either club here, if it was 50 or 60, 5 or 6 years, then I'd probably be okay with it. Am I confident that both Brighton and Palace will be in the Premier League for the full 10 years of the next decade? No, I'm not. And that would therefore change my expectations when I'm putting numbers into a spreadsheet. So I think it looks as if the new Southampton owners had perhaps over-egged that particular pudding in relation to their confidence of the club to stay at the top tier.
Well, we're all fairly certain that Palace will be in the Super League within the next 10 years, Kieran, so that's an academic question, to be perfectly honest. So, using your forensic accounting abilities, when do you see a £56 million loss and a £56 million write-down, do you go, oh, that's fair enough? Or does some sort of alarm bell start ringing that there might be PSR shenanigans going on?
No. This is very much just a sort of an admission by management that we got it wrong. We've overpaid. Now, you do that with football players all the time. You sign somebody for £30 million and you then see in the accounts as potentially a substantial write-down because that new centre forward bit bobbins, and on the back of that they see a write-down. So sometimes you get it wrong. Compared to what happens in the outside world, these write-downs were actually quite low. I remember when Microsoft tried to buy its way into the mobile phone market, it effectively bought the phone systems, the operating systems of Nokia, and it paid around about $9 billion for it. And the next year, when not a single person certainly nobody would ever admit to owning a Microsoft phone, even if they did own one, it said, "Where we got it wrong," and they wrote off the whole amount. It's part of business. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it spectacularly wrong, and you have to take those ones on the chin.
Leicester City are another club back in the Premier League, Kieran, and this next story about the Premier League ruling I thought would have made much more headlines than it did, but it seems to have been met with a collective shrug of the shoulders as, yes, yet another possible points deduction for a Premier League team.
Yeah, I'm surprised at this one going under the radar to the extent that it has. I'm also slightly surprised that there's been no noises coming out of the Premier League. For people not familiar with the story, Leicester City were relegated in 22-23. In that season, I think it was something like £114 in wages compared to every £100 coming through the door. And it looked, on the face of things, that their PSR position was going to be challenging. There was a common perception, without seeing the intricacies, without seeing the adjustments, that they could be due to had a breach and they're allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years. What they managed to do in 23-24 was, when the EFL effectively says, "We think you breached the rules," our very good friend Nick DeMarco says, well, they may or may not have breached the rules, but they breached the Premier League rules. And when I last checked, you are a member of the EFL. So therefore, the EFL cannot charge Leicester City for offences which are outside of its jurisdiction. And that ruling was upheld. And therefore, Leicester City were not subject to a business plan, which potentially could have resulted in them having to sell players in the January window. So that was seen as a victory. It looks as if Leicester have tried to do the same. They've sort of tried to sort of imply that they were effectively in the Biffin Bridge of football, in the sense that they couldn't be charged in 23-24 for a breach of the rules because they were members of the EFL, and therefore they are outside the Premier League jurisdiction as well. That appeal has not been successful, and I sort of get that, because they now are back under the jurisdiction of the Premier League, and the Premier League says, well, look, whilst you broke the rules whilst you're a member, you are now back being a member of the Premier League, and we've seen the Premier League's latest list of shareholders, or the EFL's latest list of shareholders, where Leicester City have given up their share and they've transferred it, I think, to Sheffield United or similar, or Burnley or Luton. So where does that leave the Premier League? It leaves it in a position where it can now make a value judgment. Now, given that the Premier League knew what Leicester's financial position was, one would assume, why has nothing changed? Why have we not heard anything? Because surely it's in the best interest of everybody concerned, including Leicester City, that if there is going to be a commission, we're told yay or nay, and then if the commission is going to be held, that has to be held as quickly as possible, because that has implications not just for Leicester City, but for other clubs in terms of their recruitment in the upcoming transfer window.
Reading fans, Kieran, have learnt not to count chickens in the past couple of years, but it may be the champagne is heading towards the fridge, Kieran. It may be that the thumb is heading towards the champagne cork there. And although Finley doesn't seem to agree.
He doesn't. Not quite sure what he wants. I heard him scratching at the door.
He wants wonky chops.
We were in for walks.
He wants wonky chops.
He wants food.
We know what he wants.
Oh, yes, yeah. The Baroness is out, and he's not had his 11s. He does like a cup of tea mid-morning.
Well, he's an English setter, Kieran. Of course he does.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, he's a creature of habit, and he insists on a cuppa, which I find bizarre, given that I don't drink tea.
What are his dunking skills like? Is he all right putting a digestive in there?
Yeah. Oh, you give him a digestive, he's happy as can be.
Back to Reading. We've kept Reading fans on tenterhooks long enough as it is.
Yes, we've still not seen Reading's accounts for 22-23. They're the only club of the 92 not to have published. So that put Die Jonge onto my naughty step. But the latest that we are hearing is there is a potential takeover, and the name in the frame is that of Rob Cohig, who used to own Wycombe Wanderers, and ironically, at one stage, was putting in a bid to buy Reading's training ground and then pulled out. I think there was a fairly hostile reaction from Reading fans. I felt that they seemed to feel he was asset stripping. We've had Rob on the show some time ago when I think at the time he was in dispute with the administrators of Derby County Football Club. He's an American lawyer. I think it's fair to say that he's fairly combative. He's think of Andy Holt with an American accent. And sort of, Rob. But listening to Wycombe fans, they say, there's pluses and minuses, but he's always been upfront with them, and I think that's what they've appreciated. And I would guess from a Reading fans' perspective, they want this issue of transparency, and I think he'll probably say what he means and means what he says in terms of that. And B, they'll get a bit of degree of certainty with regards to the future of the club. My view has always been is that Reading are quite an attractive proposition. And I get regular calls, ironically, from America to say, could you give us a list of 3 or 4 clubs that you think would be useful in terms of making an acquisition, because the cost of buying an American sports franchise is so prohibitive. And Reading historically have been on my list because close to London, relatively new ground. I think they've got a solid fan base. There's the opportunity to grow. So I'm not surprised that there's now sort of a bit of white smoke coming from the chimney with regards to this. But I think it's good news for Reading fans. The Die Jonge era has gone on for far too long. And it's a classic case of an owner coming in, spending money, getting bored, and then dropping the club in the doo-doos.
Yeah, and seeming to enjoy watching the fans struggle in the dude. It kind of makes you wonder whether he's got money in Thames water. A bit of money coming Portsmouth's way, Kieran.
Yes, in fact, we've seen 2 clubs that are in the Championship. Both get injections of cash. So we've got Portsmouth owners. They've got American owners. They put £9 million into the club. I think that may be in the form of debt being written off, but it means it's cash that doesn't have to go out of the club. And we've also seen Bristol City do something fairly similar with another £13 million. I think that's the positives. It is indicative that if you want to have a championship football club as your particular train set, it's going to be a very expensive one. And clubs losing money in the region of £10 million a year plus is the norm rather than the exception. But I'm always pleased to see owners either writing off existing debt and converting into shares or putting in fresh cash in the form of shares. That is far less risky than the club borrowing more and more money from the owner in case their circumstances change or perhaps they lose interest and then you can be left with more of a mess.
This next story, Kieran, involving, as it does, Nottingham Forest, I could perhaps have mentioned earlier on when we were talking about Nottingham Forest, but as you know, from experience, I've learnt not to read more than 2 news stories ahead because I confuse myself and I start reading the first sentence of one story and the second sentence of another. But Forest, is this number? This number must be right, Kieran, because producer guys put it in block capitals. But so they've issued 12.2 billion shares. Billion?
Well, yeah, billion. Yes, it's a bit like, and for listeners of a certain generation who were used to watching Grandstand on a Saturday afternoon, when a club had scored a large number of goals, they used to go and put in letters the number. It was Manchester United 7. Open brackets, SEVEN, close brackets, Northampton Town 0, or whatever, and so on. So Nottingham Forest have, because I sometimes get, I wouldn't say it's abuse, I sometimes get taken to task by fans of certain clubs who say if a club's got lots and lots of shares in issue, that makes them zombie shares or something similar. Well, Nottingham Forest have 12.2 billion shares. And the reason for this, going back and in fact linking to the previous story, is that the owner has converted a lot of debt into shares. He's effectively written off the debt. We know that he's keen to expand the stadium and so on. And I think in terms of ensuring that the accounts look tidy, you've got 2 things. You've got loans which the club will never be in a position to be able to repay. So you might as well transfer them to shares. But if you are going to approach third parties for borrowing money, it looks a lot neater if you don't have any existing debt. So this is very much sort of just Forest being a fairly tidy organisation, and they do have more shares in issue than Microsoft, who are the world's most valuable company, at around about $3.6 trillion. But those individual shares of Microsoft are worth considerably more than an individual share in Nottingham Forest.
So that's trillion in brackets, TRILLION.
That's right, yes.
Now, pop pickers, here's a blast from the past. This story, Kieran, involves Gareth Barry and Swindon Town, which I think we spoke about in the very first week of the pod. Why has it taken so long for this story to re-emerge?
Because the wheels of investigative powers turn slowly at times. Gareth Barry used to be, I think his agent was a guy called Michael Standing. And actually, Gareth Barry and Michael Standing got to know each other when they were in the Brighton and Hove Albion Academy. Gareth Barry was then transferred to Aston Villa. Michael Standing, I think he might have gone as part of the deal, but he moved on to a career at other clubs. Gareth Barry, as we know, continued a very, very long-standing career, mainly in fact, not all in the Premier League, in effect. So Michael Standing was trying to acquire Swindon Town Football Club, and at one point in time, money which appeared to be from Michael Standing went into Swindon Town Football Club and the owner, Lee Power. Now, Lee Power, if you say his name in Swindon, you'll get a look. For anybody that's seen An American Werewolf in London, it's a bit like the look that those 2 American tourists got when they wandered into that pub in Yorkshire. And it's not a favourable look. And then there's been an ongoing dispute between Michael Standing and Lee Power for a period of time. And I think Lee Power appears to have dibbed in, I think is the technical or the legal phrase, because it looks like Michael Standing, who then became a football agent, didn't necessarily have all of the money himself. And Gareth Barry effectively put the money in as a mate. Now, that would have been a breach of rules because Gareth Barry at the time was a Premier League footballer, and a footballer is not allowed to be an owner or part owner of another football club. So the conclusion of the panel was a technical breach. Don't do it again. I don't think it's a problem. I don't think Gareth Barry's going to come out of retirement to try to test those particular waters. But it is indicative that the rules that we have in football are quite long and detailed. And sometimes you can breach the rules. I don't think the player would have known himself that he was in breach of the rules. He probably thought he was just helping out a mate.
We talk a lot about sell-on clauses, Kieran, on this pod, in particular on the questions pod, because our listeners are somewhat obsessed with contracts and sell-on clauses. But here is an example of a club benefiting from a nice little windfall, Kieran.
It is a nice little windfall. It could have been an even nicer little windfall if the full terms of the contract had been applied. So what we're talking about here is Maidenhead United. They sold Max Kilman to Wolverhampton Wanderers, I think it was about 6 years ago. And it is rumoured that as part of the deal, there was a 20% sell-on clause that Wolverhampton Wanderers were quite happy to agree to, and Maidenhead United were quite happy to agree to, and they accepted that as part of the fee. Now, Kilman has just gone to West Ham for an estimated £40 million. 20% of 40 million is 8, but it looks as if Wolves and West Ham have both said to Maidenhead, if you're going to take 20% of this, the deal ain't going to go through.
Oh.
So what Maidenhead have done with their fantastically named owner, Peter Griffin, as a Family Guy super fan, he's my hero as a result of that. It looks as if they said, we'd rather have half a loaf than none. So it now appears that they're going to get 10% of the sale proceeds, i.e. they're going to get £4 million as opposed to 8. But if you take a look at the accounts of Maidenhead United, this will still be spectacularly transformative. So it will allow them to repay any money if Peter Griffin wants to take it out, but if not, to invest in facilities. I guess fans will be hoping there will be a wee bit more money in their own transfer budget. But it does show the importance of sell-on fees. You know yourself with Michael Elise that when a player leaves, your first reaction is you look at that big number. But if there's a sell-on, you've then got to, and this goes back, of course, to our discussion about Reading, that would have a potential impact upon the sale price of the club if Rob Kopeck acquires it.
So 2 vastly wealthy Premier League teams have said to a non-league team, we don't care what the clause in the contract says, this deal's not happening if you want all the money that you're legally entitled to.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's
just so we know.
It's power.
Yeah, just so we know. This is a story that will cause a lot of anguish amongst Championship fans, Kieran, about Leeds United and their ticket pricing.
Yeah, I think this is a positive. Leeds United have often complained that, let's be honest, they've been the biggest, if not one of the biggest fish in the Championship pond. And Leeds United fans, along with fans of many other clubs, it has to be said, in the Championship, travel in huge numbers. And the feeling has been at times that other clubs have exploited that by charging high away ticket prices. So what Leeds said, I think it was last season, is that if we sign a reciprocal agreement, if you're going to charge us £30, we'll charge you £30. If you're not going to sign such an agreement, we're going to charge away fans at Ellen Road £47. And it looks as if they've decided that they're not going to go along that particular. And I think on the back of that, it does look as if away fans will be paying a bit less. So I think this is actually probably a positive. We'll have to wait to see what those actual prices are. But I think this story has actually probably generated a positive rather than a negative response. We wait to see the prices. I do think it's an anachronism that we have a away ticket price cap in the Premier League and we don't have it in the EFL. Now, the EFL clubs will say, look, we're losing money hand over fist. Why should we restrict our ability to charge people? Well, if you expect people to travel 100, 200 miles up and down the country to spend a few more quid, not charging them 45, 50, 54. I think the highest price is £54 for an away ticket in the Championship. That's just being a bit decent. And overall, it doesn't make a huge difference to the overall finances. So why not do the right thing? Even if you said 35 quid, which I personally think is too high, it would be a step in the right direction. But owners have to vote for that, and clearly owners have chosen not to vote for that.
My response to that, Kieran, is to leave a slight pause and then say, this is a story that will cause no anguish at all to fans in the Championship. And then producer guy now has the option to put that in at the start. It probably won't do for timing reasons. I saw the word scrapped, thought it was bad news, Kieran, which is why I should never try doing any sort of research. And I've tried to read 2 stories ahead, see what happened. I mentioned it earlier on, what could happen, and it did happen. We mentioned Motherwell, Kieran, on our questions pod, our last question pod, in terms of damage done to their stadium. But there's news about a proposed takeover bid there now.
Yes, it is a proposed takeover bid, and I think it's fair to say that a reaction has been very mixed. This is coming from American investors. I think they're called the Black Sheep or something like that. And I've got to hold my hand up here. As part of one of the proposals they made, they screenshotted a tweet from me where I'd done a summary of Scottish football finances, but there was one number in a huge array of many hundreds of numbers, which was incorrect, which was, ironically, the Motherwell wage bill. I'd put it in from the wrong year.
Right.
Motherwell fans, or some Motherwell fans, feel uncomfortable that, having seen the proposals coming from this organisation, which are quite detailed, that it's not necessarily in the best interest of the club. The Wells Society, which is effectively the custodian of the club at present, it's come in for some criticism from some fans and not from others. It looks as if fans now have a period of time, I think it's a couple of weeks, in which to make a final decision as to whether they feel the bid should be accepted. And we wait to see. We are seeing a huge amount of interest in Scottish football from American investors. Now, I don't know whether this is partly due to historic links. That there is a very significant ex-Scottish population in the United States, and they look back to the old country in very much the way that many people originally from Ireland do so, who are now located in the States, either through the current generation or former generations. I think there's also a perception amongst American investors is that whilst they acknowledge that the top 2 positions as far as European football are gone, and probably gone forever, given the financial advantage that Rangers and Celtic have over the rest of the Scottish Premiership, getting into the Europa League can be very lucrative. And if you could become the 3rd power horse in Scottish football, there's money to be made from appearing regularly in European football, especially with the move to the Swiss-style model. So Scottish football clubs are quite cheap to buy. You don't have to invest huge sums of money in terms of budgets. And therefore, the opportunity to get into the top half of the Premiership and then be pushing for that 3rd place can be very beneficial financially. So we've seen investment from into some of the Edinburgh-based clubs and now Motherwell and so on, because they're all chasing that particular pot of gold.
Near impossible, Kieran, to mention a Scottish football story without mentioning Celtic and Rangers. And ironically, our penultimate question takes us to Celtic. Or our penultimate story, sorry.
Yes, Celtic's share price, for reasons which nobody can quite fathom up, has been shooting up. And again, for the sake of complete transparency, I own shares in Celtic. I bought shares in Celtic. I think I paid 95 pence for them, and they're almost double that now. But there's been a substantial increase in Celtic's share price. It's gone up by 1/3 in the last month. It's probably gone up by around about 50% over the course of this year. And nobody can quite work out why. There's not a huge number of shares available, but there's enough. Some people are speculating that, does this mean that the owner is looking for an exit route? There's no evidence of that as far as I can make out. So it could just be a short-term anomaly, in which case I should be selling my shares and cashing in. Or perhaps there is more going on. Celtic's finances are looking fantastic. They are run on a very prudent basis, in my view. They certainly make money on a regular basis. And it could be that some other people in the market have observed that and say, actually, we feel that this is a cash generative club. It's going to be qualifying for the Champions League on a regular basis. We've seen the increased money available in the Champions League, and therefore we want a slice of the pie.
Our last story, Kieran, I mean, the general election threw up some remarkable statistics. No matter what your political shade is, you have to accept it did do that. But there's one football-based one, Kieran, which I did a proper cartoon double take, rubbing my eyes, which it's an astonishing... I'll leave you to share it, Kieran, but it's an astonishing stat.
Yes, following the general election, and hats off. This is why I love football fans so much. This is somebody who's probably thought about this in the past. Do you know, I need to check up on this. There is only one club in the Premier League and the EFL which now has a Conservative Party as their MP, and that's the brand new member of the EFL, Bromley Football Club. So there's been a switch, and we're in a politics show, but there's been a switch, I think, back from what used to be the Red Wall to back to being the Red Wall, and so on. And it's worth thinking about. It also has to be said that there are many grassroots football clubs in football who do have a Conservative MP still. But as far as the 92 is concerned, if I was a senior person in the Conservative Party, I'd be asking myself, that probably doesn't look too good. We ought to perhaps find out why.
Yeah. My only disappointment is that this stat may have come about because there are two blokes probably celebrating Labour's victory drunk on Friday night. And one of them went, I'll tell you what, I bet there's no football clubs left in the Tory constituency. And they've chicked off all the clubs. They've gone right down, going, there's no league clubs in the Tory constituency. And then fucking Bromley's ruined it for one of them. One of them's lost a 10 quid bet because there is one league club in the Tory constituency. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. It'll get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on our regular Tuesday show, then email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. If you'd like to buy our book, which is coming out in paperback soon, you can find details on the same website, priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter X, and you can find us on our YouTube channel. We'll be back with a questions pod on Tuesday when we'll know who's won the Euros. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
As always, folks, thank you so much for keeping us informed. I'd also like to thank the fan of Scottish football who did get in contact with me to say you've not been looking at the small print of the SPFL constitution enough.
Indeed.
And he was exactly right. And under the rules of Scottish football, there is an obligation on away teams to pay the first £25,000 of any damage. And that's in statute. I think anything in excess of that is possibly open to negotiation. And this is why I think our listenership are street ahead of we are, of where we are in terms of their desire to check up and say, hold on, I think I'm pretty certain. I've looked at section 4, subclause 7. That's a fantastic way of keeping us on our toes. But there's another way you can support the show as well as Patreon if you want the advertisement-free version of the show, and that's to give us a review. It does help. You can say what you want. We've been accused of being woke recently, yet again, which is something that's something we have to bear, I guess, being people that try to express opinions based on fact as opposed to feelings. But you can say whatever you want. We've got to respect the views of listenership. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Jean-Claude Van Damme and Gareth Southgate.
Ooh.
Because I'm in Berlin, I'm flying back on Monday, and I'm not sure I'll be in time to record the podcast. So perhaps if those two gentlemen are free, one of them might want to step into my shoes.
Ooh, well, we don't know what mood. Well, Gareth might be free. Hopefully he won't be. Jean-Claude Van Damme, I met him once and I went in for the handshake and was told I couldn't shake his hand.
Really?
Yeah, just in case it. I don't know if it's an insurance thing or whether they thought he couldn't throw himself off an exploding car in case I squeezed his hand too far. That's pretty much the end of the conversation as well, really. So I nearly shook Jean-Claude Van Damme's hand is another potential title for my autobiography, which is Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. Brighton Football.